So hi everyone, yeah, my name's Holly. I'm a clinical scientist in genomics at the Liverpool lab, and I'm also workforce and education lead for the Northwest Genomic Medicine Service Alliance. So I'm only going to talk for a quick few minutes just to give you an overview of my career so far, how I got into genetics, and then hopefully there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you want to go on to the next slide, please, Nick. So I did the STP, the Scientist Training Programme. So before that, I did a degree in biological sciences at Oxford University, and after this, I had an unsuccessful application actually to the STP. So the first time I applied, I managed to get to interview stage, but I got on the reserve list. So this made me realise actually that this is definitely what I want to do. So I was going to have to wait another year to give it a second attempt. So in that year, I thought, well, what do I need to do to improve my application? So I decided to apply for a volunteer position at the genetics lab based at Liverpool Women's Hospital, which is actually where I work now. And I started volunteering in the lab, and from that position, I gained a band 3 post in the DNA extraction room. So just processing blood samples and carrying out DNA extractions. So I think from that experience, it actually really helped my application. It gave me a good understanding of how genomics labs work in the NHS, and just gave me a lot more experience and knowledge that I didn't have in the previous year. I also completed a master's at Chester University in medical genetics, but actually I think it was more the experience of working in the lab that boosted my application rather than having the additional masters, although obviously that did help because my original degree was biological sciences, so that was really broad, so I only had a little bit of genetics knowledge, whereas the masters did definitely help me. So then after all that, on the second go, I had a successful application to the STP. In 2016, I started for genomics. So I guess couple of things to just take from that. First of all, experience is key. So, you know, getting that volunteer role, although, you know, I wasn't doing, you know, really sort of demanding tasks, it gave me a good insight into the lab and how the functioning of the lab works. At the minute, I know it's really difficult to get into labs and volunteering and work experience, especially with COVID, but even attending things like this and just getting a bit more knowledge of how an actual genomics lab works in the NHS will really be beneficial. And secondly, don't worry if you don't get a place the first time around. It's really uncommon actually for people to get a place on the STP first time round, but that goes for lots of different jobs within the lab as well. So if it's what you want to do, then don't be disheartened if you don't get it the first time. Next slide, please, Nick. So after the STP, so I finished the STP in 2019 and I became a HCPC registered clinical scientist in genomics. So you can register with the HCPC once you've finished the scientist training programme. And since then, I've been working as a clinical scientist on the oncology section. And the services I've been mostly responsible for are the DPYD service and the MPN service. So DPYD is a new pharmacogenomic test that we've recently started doing in our lab. And if you don't know about it, I'll just give you a quick idea of what that is. So some cancer patients are treated with a certain type of chemotherapy containing 5-FU or 5-fluorouracil. And it's now been sort of made known that there are 4 variants in the DPYD gene that are known to cause toxicity to this type of chemo. So nowadays, anyone getting that type of chemotherapy must be screened for the DPYD gene first. And if they've got a variant in that gene, then they're dose of chemo might need to be adjusted or lowered. That's just a quick overview. It's a bit more to it than that. And I would really encourage you, if you don't know about that, if you've not heard about it before, that you should definitely learn more about it. And I actually did a video on DPYD that's on my Scout Scientist YouTube channel. So if you want to learn more, then go and have a look at that. So as I said, in 2019, I then started the Scout Scientist, which is a YouTube channel and social media platforms that I'm obviously trying to promote here on the screen. But basically, they will give you some idea of what goes on in the lab. I've filmed a lot of things, a lot of different tests that we do in the lab, and it'll really give you a good insight into what the lab looks like and the types of things that we do on a daily basis. So as well as this, I became a training officer for STPs, and I often speak at the Train the Trainer events that the National School of Healthcare Science holds. Last year, I joined the FRC Path Study Group. So if you don't know what that is, basically, once you've become a registered scientist, there are further exams that you can then take in order to be eligible to apply for a consultant clinical scientist role. And one of these is the FRC Path Part 1 exam. So I joined that study group last year with the intention of sitting the exam in the near future. And then finally, towards the end of last year and the start of this year, I got a role as Workforce Development and Health Education England's liaison lead with the North West Genomic Medicine Service Alliance. So that's a new role, basically educating the workforce about genomics. So what I'm trying to show you with this slide is not just a list of things that I've done, but basically to say that your career path doesn't end once you become a scientist. There's so many different avenues that you can go down, and depends on what it is you're interested in. There's lots of different routes that you could take once you are registered. And also there'll be so many new job roles in genomics in the future. So obviously it's a really constantly evolving field. And, you know, when I started, the job that I've got now with the Northwest GMSA didn't exist. And actually the GMSAs are a really new thing that have just started in the NHS. So I'm sure that, you know, if there's a job that you're interested in that isn't out there yet and it's in genomics, then I'm sure in the future there's going to be a lot more opportunities in genomics. So next slide, please, Nick. And that was all from me. I just wanted to be really quick, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Holly. So yeah, as Holly said, we'll take the questions in the end. So after the next brief session, which will be Matthew. So Matthew is one of our genetic technologists.
Hi there.
Hi, Matthew. Again, just going to try and share my screen. Okay. Okay, you should be able to see that now.
Great, thanks, Nick. So I currently work at the Genomic Diagnostic Lab here in Manchester as a genetic technologist. Before applying, I previously studied a biology degree. I just had a few years' experience in a non-genetic based lab. I started here in April as an assistant genetic technologist, which is a band 3 role. And in August, I was promoted to a band 5. The role is pretty varied. It's a mixture between laboratory and analyst responsibilities. In general, genetic technologists, regardless of the section, work to prepare a range of samples for analysis and also analyze genomic data with the guidance of clinical scientists. So because you're working with clinical scientists quite closely, it can be a great stepping stone to those who wish to progress to a clinical scientist role, whether that be on the STP or the pre-reg pathway. Myself, I work in the cytogenetics team, mainly within the cell bank and prenatal sections. Cell bank is a pretty unique laboratory. where we have a mixture of diagnostic and quality-based procedures. For example, we grow lymphocyte cell cultures for RNA extraction, which is useful to detecting some forms of neurofibromatosis. Within the prenatal section, I primarily receive amniotic fluid samples, which are used to set up for culturing or prepare them for QF-PCR or array analysis. And these are mainly referred to as due to the mother receiving a Down syndrome screening risk or an abnormal scan. And then when I'm not in the lab, I'm performing analysis of chromosomal arrays at my desk, which I move to the next slide. I have like a little example. So this is just a small screenshot of the software we use to analyze our microarrays. I'm sure a lot of people know, using from the survey, many people with postgraduate degrees, microarray uses fluorescent probes to highlight many regions across a patient's genome. This provides us with a map-like of the patient's genomes, as chromosomes, and highlights any duplications or deletions of DNA. In this example, we have chromosome 5, where you can see at the terminal end, we have a loss of genetic material. So the software also maps where certain genes and known syndromes have been found previously. So automatically has labeled this region as pathogenic because it's covering known important regions of DNA. However, in other instances, we have to research which genes are found in these locations where a variant has been identified and use our clinical judgment to classify whether a duplication or a deletion will affect the patient. I really enjoy this element of my role because I'm able to learn more about genetics. There's something I've not seen every day that comes about, and enjoy having that element of improving my knowledge. In general, I feel like really supported in my role. I feel in the department is really invested in my professional development. As through work, I've secured funding for a part-time master's at the University of Manchester, studying genomic medicine. Initially, I applied for the assistant genetic technologist role with the intention of gaining more experience within genetics and apply for the STP in genetic counselling. So naturally, I was delighted when I had the opportunity to study a genetic counselling module at the University of Manchester alongside my work. So if someone is wishing to apply to the STP or perhaps wants to gain a bit more professional experience within genetics, I would definitely recommend going for either band 3 or band 5, because it might give you a bit more enriched examples that you can pull out in your application. But I think that's all that I have to say, unless people have any questions afterwards.
Great, thank you very much, Matthew. So yeah, if Matthew and Holly can stay with your cameras turned on, just see whether we've got any questions. Please do feel free to ask any more questions via Twitter or in the chat on Zoom. So I think we've got a question by Loretta. Did you get the Masters before the STP or during the STP program? I assume that's going to Holly.
So I did sorry, I think froze then. So I did a Masters before the STP, so it was a Masters in medical genetics, but then as part of the STP, you have to do a Masters anyway, as part of the program. So I ended up with 2 Masters, but that's not really that uncommon for the program because a lot of people that join the STP already have a Masters anyway. But for me, if I was to give any advice, I would say the experience for me was more important than having the Masters, if that makes sense. There's a question on my screen, Nick, but I don't know whether it's just been sent to me. I don't know whether you can see it from Caitlin.
Yeah, we've got a few more questions. So there's another one by Connor. How did you apply to be a volunteer at the Liverpool Women's Hospital Genetics Lab? And did you see it advertised, or was it a self-made opportunity?
So I like that phrase, a self-made opportunity, and yet that is exactly what it was. I just went on the Liverpool Women's website, found a random email address from someone who worked in the genetics labs and emailed them, and eventually, well, at first they said no, they're not taking on any volunteers at the minute. And after I pestered them for a while, they eventually let me in. So I think that's a good way to go about things, just creating your own opportunities, emailing people. Having said that, obviously now with COVID, we haven't had any volunteers in our lab at all, because we're trying to have minimum staff on site at all times. But like Matthew was saying, there's always in our labs jobs going up for band 3 genetic technologists, which is what I did at the start. And a lot of people start out as a band 3 or 4 in the lab just to get some experience. So if volunteering isn't an option at the minute, which I know it's very difficult to get, then if you can consider applying for a band 3 or 4 job as a GT, then that's definitely a foot in the door and a way to get some more experience.
Thank you. We've got a few more questions. We'll take a couple more, and the remaining ones we can address a bit later on, just in the interest of time. So we've got how much, one by Mia, what was the hardest part of the STP?
I guess one of the hardest parts was probably the amount of like knowledge that you have to remember at the end. So at the end of the STP, there was a big exam called the OSFA, but that's changed now because of COVID, so it's slightly different. But I think there was just, you were expected to know a lot of things from all the different sections in the lab. So in the lab, there's lots of different teams that work on different diseases. And once you're registered, like I am now, I only work on one section. So I don't need to know everything about all the other sections. So there was a lot of things that I had to remember. And that was quite difficult. But I mean, if you're used to uni and exams and stuff like that, then it's no different really to anything else.
Thanks, Holly. We've got another question about basically someone wondering how much of a disadvantage it would be applying for the STP if you haven't had the chance to have volunteering on your CV or lab experience because of the pandemic, basically, despite trying to get that. And I mean, I can say from our point of view that that is totally understandable. And because the last couple of years, labs have not really been taking people for work experience. And at the moment, due to COVID, we're not actually taking people for work experience either. That might change in the near future. But that, in my opinion, that should definitely not put you off applying for the roles, for the STP roles, and because especially, you know, this year it will be very understandable if you don't have relevant experience, but it's not essential either. It's not like an essential requirement. There are people who have been successful straight out of university without necessary, you know, experience in a lab. Obviously, it is a big bonus to have it, but it's not a must. So we'll just take another question about the two roles. How do the two roles differ? From Katie. I'm not sure who that's directed to. So Katie, if you could post the question again. So I don't know if it's the two roles that Holly has, or the role of Holly and versus Matthews.
Is it maybe the assistant genetic technologist and the genetic technologist, maybe? Could be. But yeah, Katie, if you can just repost your question and we'll address it later. Can we do a PhD after STP? Yes, you most definitely can. And actually, there's a route called the HSST, which we'll mention a bit later on in Chloe's session, from which you can actually get a PhD if you follow the following completion of your STP course. We've got a few more questions about STP and FRC path, but because we've got a dedicated section on STP, we'll have to address those later on. So we'll, in the interest of time, we'll just move on to our next section, which is the virtual tour of our genomics lab in Manchester. And this is a pre-recorded video. It's 5 minutes long, so I will share it through my screen and come back to you as soon as it's ready.
Hi everyone and welcome to the Northwest Genomic Laboratory Hub, otherwise known as the Northwest GLH. This is the Manchester lab and this is the genomics sample reception. So this is where samples are dropped off and delivered to the lab. So if you come with me, I'm going to show you where they go next. So this is the specimen reception room and I'm going to introduce you to Rebecca, who's going to tell you what happens here.
I'm Rebecca, I'm an AGT in the pre-analytical team and also work in sample reception. When the samples arrive, they come in through the window over there, are unpacked by our MLA team, who will then put them in boxes and on this ramp here, ready for AGTs to book them in on that side. Once the AGTs have booked them in, they go down these ramps here. So the samples will then come down to the duty scientists who sit on this side, who will triage the samples, route them for a disease code extraction. They will then go from here to the different teams, whether that be in pre-analytical, being put in that fridge to be routed to Liverpool as part of our sample transfers, or sent over to the cytogenetics team for culturing.
Once the samples have been checked and triaged, if the test requires DNA extraction, then that's done here using this machine known as the chemogen, and blood samples are loaded onto the machine and we are left with DNA samples at the end that can go on for further testing. Follow me and I'll show you where the DNA goes next. These are all the PCR machines, or polymerase chain reaction, and these are used to amplify up the DNA and make lots and lots of copies of the part of the DNA that we're interested in testing. After some further processing, samples can then come to the sequencing room where we can analyse the specific sequencing of DNA in further detail. After the sequencing is complete, the data is processed by our bioinformatics team. The data is then sent across to our scientists who sit in offices like this. So let's go and find out what they're up to.
Hi everyone, I'm Nick, I'm a clinical scientist and I'm based in an office most of my time, almost all of my time. So as Holly said, once the data is produced from the bioinformatics team, that gets sent to us, the clinical scientists, and we then look for variations of what we would expect to be the normal sequence. And if we do identify some variations, then we try and see whether they could be the cause for a specific disease or not. And we use different types of software, such as you can see one piece of software that we use on the screen here. And once we've done all our analysis, we then write up a report and we send that report to our colleagues. So it could be clinical geneticists or clinical oncologists or genetic counsellors, now called genomic counsellors. Once that report is sent, they can then decide by using some of these results what the best treatment might be for a patient or what the diagnosis might be and how they can talk to the family about potential implications of that.
As Nick said, we work very closely with our clinical colleagues, and in Manchester most of these are based down at the other end of this corridor here. So this has been a whistle-stop tour of the Manchester lab, but it's important to note that we do lots of other techniques, and although we are the central hub for the Northwest, we work very closely with our Liverpool lab, which is where I'm based, and also with different labs across the Northwest.
Right, so that was our video. Thanks to Holly for organizing this video for us on the virtual lab tour. As we said, unfortunately, we haven't had the chance to have people physically within the department, but hopefully that will change in the near future. So I think now we can spend 5 more minutes maybe on taking a few questions. So I don't have any of the co-hosts, have any of the questions been addressed in the chat so far, or do we need to keep going from where we stopped?
Nick, I can't see the questions in the chat. I think
you can't. Oh, right.
maybe only
Okay.
you can see them, so you might have to read them out.
Right. Okay. Okay. So in terms of a question from Michael, in terms of applications for the STP, is it more valuable to focus on NHS values or experience? So, you know, these questions, anyone from our panel could answer these if you want to. Any of the current STP students as well, please feel free to chip in.
I got a question asking about what lab experience I had before applying as an assistant genetic technologist from Connor. I just did a straight biology degree, and then I had 2 years of work experience in a non-genetic based lab doing immunoassays, but by no means this is not necessary. It was just my career path. Many people that join as assistant genetic technologists have masters, but I don't think that should put you off if you don't. I think an undergraduate degree is more than enough. And you can easily progress into band 5 if there's positions available. It just depends on the vacancies.
Great, thank you very much. Michael will address your question, I think, at the end when we have our STP session. Similarly, for the FRC Path course question, although I can briefly answer that one. How many years is the FRC Path course? That is a 5-year course, and it includes a PhD, basically a doctorate in it as well. And I think depending on whether you have a PhD or not and what field it is, it can be more of a clinical aspect to it rather than a pure research PhD. We have a question about the genetic counselling STP, but again, in our STP session, we'll have some current genetic counsellors who can answer those as well, address those. This was from Beth. There's a question by Boitumelo. Do you start a band 3 with masters?
No, so a lot of people that have joined recently have had masters. I think it's quite competitive working on genetics lab at the minute, but it's not necessary at all. I don't think it's to actually get a band 3. You don't even require a degree. It's just very competitive. But during while I've been working here, I've had the opportunity to study for a master's, which has been funded by Genomic Health in England, I believe. And that's been really useful. If you don't have a master's, perhaps consider working here, band 3, band 5, and maybe you can work part-time, study part-time rather.
And another question from Amber: how long does it take to be promoted from assistant GT to GT?
I mean, there's no real time frame. I had 2 years lab experience before applying, so I think what I lacked to apply for a band 5 was just the knowledge of an NHS diagnostic laboratory, like a genetics lab. So for me, it was quite fast because I already had the basic lab experience. So I was just learning how this lab operates. But in general, it's around a year, 2 years, just depending on where your experience lies.
Excellent, thank you very much. And take one more question from Emma. I have a degree in zoology with a module in genetics. Love the genetics module. Would I be able to apply for a lower band role and climb the ladder without volunteering experience?
Yeah, absolutely. There's people with bioarchaeology, I think, in our lab, so why not?
Yeah, I would also encourage applying for that type of role. There's no reason why you shouldn't apply for it. And as you said, yeah, you can climb the ladder through gaining experience at the initial jobs you get into. And we'll take one more question from Dima. Is the progression from an assistant genetic technologist to a genetic technologist easy? I think that's similar to the one we had before. Again, I don't think it's easy or difficult. It just depends on the timing of what vacancies are available. And obviously, you know, if you've got, let's say, a year's experience as an assistant genetic technologist, that will be very useful to become a genetic technologist after that, as soon as a vacancy does come available. And we do have vacancies quite frequently.
I do think it's like important to apply for like a band 3 to get like your foot in the door. A lot of people apply for band 5s, and I feel like a lot of the time they're taking in-house from people who are band 3s. So I think just to get your foot in the door is really helpful if anyone's considering a band 5.
Right, great. Thank you very much for this. So we'll move on to our next session, which will be provided by Chloe. Chloe, do you want me to share your slides?
Yeah, I don't mind either way. I'm happy to share them, or if you want to, that's fine.
Yeah, go ahead. You try and share your side.
Yeah, no problem. So bear with me one moment and I'll just get that up for everyone. So just while that's loading, so hello everyone, my name is Chloe and I am from the GM Health and Social Care Careers Hub. So hopefully you can see those slides okay now. So we are a little bit less specialised than the rest of the people on this call. So the aim of the GM Health and Social Care Career Hub is to really ensure that you have all the knowledge and information you need to decide on your career pathways, to apply for jobs, and to support you in gaining a role within health and social care, and that includes obviously the NHS and our labs as well. So I'm here to sort of talk through a couple of the different options that you guys may have, and also to let you know about some support that we can provide you in hopefully gaining some experience within the NHS and in hopefully supporting you in getting into the roles and courses that you want to. So firstly, just to kind of cover some of the pathways, and because there's a few of you at different levels, I'm going to quite quickly go through some of these because some of them may not be relevant for all of you, but I just want to touch base for those of you who it might be relevant for. So there's a few different options for you depending on what level you are at in terms of becoming a healthcare scientist. So for those of you who are in school, you may have options of T-levels, which are a 2-year qualification at level 3. That includes industry placements. So they're kind of on the increase, on the rise, and they may be an option for you to gain some experience. Apprenticeships we have at all different levels, and they're a great way again to gain some qualifications and experience. Practitioner training program gets you that Bachelor of Science. So for anyone who's completed their college course and would like to get a university degree, that might be an option. We also have the STP, which you'll learn loads more about in the next section, and the HSST, the Higher Specialist Science Training Programme. So I'll go through these quite quickly, just again to make sure that you all know the options, and if anyone has any questions about any of these more specifically, then you can let us know. So T levels are, like I said, for people who are wanting to study level 3 after their GCSEs, and they're a mixture of class-based learning and on-the-job learning as well. There's more of these popping up all over the place, so if anyone on the call is currently studying their GCSEs, that might be an option for you. We also then have apprenticeships. Now I know that at NFT there are some apprenticeship options coming up for you in healthcare science. So these are at level 2, 4 and 6, and the levels kind of correspond with your qualifications. So for example, a level 6 apprenticeship is equivalent to a university degree, which is at a level 6. So apprenticeships are great because they basically offer you the hands-on work experience and classroom learning. So I know some of you were thinking about where you can get experience, and apprenticeships are a great option for that because you'll get both the work placements and the qualifications compared to your more traditional university or college degree. So again, that's something to bear in mind, depending on what level you guys already have. This might be an option for you. So for example, your level 4 you might do after you've done a college qualification at level 3, and your level 6 one you can also do after level 3 as well. So then we have the practitioner training program, and this will get you a BSc, so that's the equivalent of a degree that you could get at a university, and this includes quite broad scientific training in the first 2 years, and then a more of a focus into a specialism in year 3. So again, this has a combination of work-based learning and university, and I know that there are some of these coming up in the team over the next few years. So again, that might be something of interest for anyone who has maybe not yet got their university qualifications and would like to do so. So that's quite kind of similar to an apprenticeship, doing a combination of the two. So higher specialist scientist training is the HSST, is a 5-year work-based program. So this is for people who already have a registration as a clinical scientist. So you need that already. So this is for people who are already qualified, already have that experience, and maybe want to advance that further and get a doctorate. So this is a 5-year bespoke workplace program. It's very specialized to whatever you or your employer wants to do, and yeah, at the end of that you'll finish with a doctorate. So that's quite a good program for anyone who wants to kind of increase their knowledge and experience in the field as well. So those are some of the options, and it was quite I've gone through that quite quickly just because I don't know what you guys are interested in. I don't want to talk loads about something that no one wants to know about. So if you do have any questions, please do just let us know in the chat, and I'll try and answer those the best I can. There's lots of different links on here that you guys can go on to for more information. So I don't know if you maybe want to take a picture of that, or I can pop the links in the chat as well. But yeah, you can find out lots of information on these websites to help you with your research. So yeah, if anyone wants to kind of take a screenshot of that, then you're more than welcome to. There's lots of more information about all of these again on the various websites. So if you're interested in apprenticeships, you can look on the NHS jobs website. If you're interested in the PTP, you can find loads of information about that on UCAS. And then for the HSST, you can look on the National School of Healthcare Sciences website, and the link is on there as well. Again, I can pop these in the chat after I've finished this bit, so you guys are able to have those links as well. So that's that, and now I just want to give you a quick overview about how we can support you going forward. So we have a program called Next Step NHS. This is quite a general program, but what it will do is support you in applications. So if anyone is applying for different jobs in the NHS, applying for work experience, and wants just a little bit more advice on how to structure your application, what things to put in there, how to kind of conduct yourself at an interview, this can really help with that. And we have one of these sessions once a month on various dates and times. And you can go on those. Again, it's quite general, not specific to healthcare science or genomics, but it will just give you hopefully a little bit of a boost, confidence boost in terms of your applications and interviews. So again, I'll put a link in the chat box for you guys to find out about that. As you can see, these are on a few different dates in February and March. The January one was on today, so unfortunately you can't see that one, but I can again put the link in the chat if anyone would like to sign up and get a little bit more information. And again, that's just kind of a bit of knowledge and information about applying to jobs. We also have quite a lot of online workshops that you can join, like this, just an hour-long session you can hop onto, normally delivered by Teams, and they'll give you quite a bit of an overview and insight into different things. So we have some mock interviews you can have a go at, and we have some, again, information on applying for jobs in the NHS as well. And we have like recruiting managers and stuff on there who talk through what they look for in applications, etc. And again, we have some different workshops here. These are mainly based aimed at people who are in school or college, but we welcome anyone, and they're on loads of different areas. So if you want to know a little bit more about some different options that you might have for those of you who are kind of still at that sort of decision stage, these again might be a good option for you. And I'll put our website in the chat box so you guys can see. They'll be similar to kind of this sort of style, information, talks from people in the industry, and a chance for you guys to ask questions. So they are normally really useful for people who are trying to figure out their jobs or trying to know how to sort of maximize their applications, etc. So yeah, that's it from me. On the screen is our email and Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Please do follow us on those, and you'll get some updates on our different events and things. And again, I'll pop our email into the chat so you guys can have that if you do have any questions. We are linked with all the foundation trusts within Greater Manchester. I know some of you might be outside of that region, but if you drop us an email, we can forward you on to the relevant people. We want to be a good sort of one-stop shop for you if you ever have any questions. So please do, if you do want to know anything, feel free to drop us an email and we will either try and answer that ourselves or we can pass you on to the relevant person. So yeah, that is everything from me. I'll stop sharing my screen. And if anyone has any questions, then please let me know.
Thank you very much, Chloe. That's very informative. And just to point out to everyone that Chloe and her organisation have a very good network and connections, so would be a very good person to contact with any inquiries you might have.
Yeah, if anyone doesn't know who to contact, we're quite a good first person to get in touch with, because we can forward you on to whoever we think is appropriate. Okay,
great. So I think we'll spend the next 5 minutes just answering a few more questions. Apologies, but for some reason all the questions are only coming to me, I think. So I'll just read a few more out. So we have a question from Mike, who's an international graduate and already has a PhD and master's degree in cell biology and genetics, and asking whether he can still apply for the STP. I believe that is not a problem, but you need to go through, I can't remember the name of the organization, but prove the equivalence of your qualifications, that they meet the standards required for the STP. Unless anyone from the panel has any more specific details about that. But yeah, but there's definitely an equivalence that you need to prove with regards to your degrees. And the National School of Healthcare Scientists would be the best people to ask about that, since they deal directly with the STP applications. Another question from Katie: between tech role and clinical scientist, is the tech role more lab-based? Yes, I can answer that. That's definitely the case. Tech role is almost solely based in the labs. and then you also have your desk where you might be doing analysis of data. But as a clinical scientist, you don't really go much into the lab. It's more about troubleshooting assays and analyzing data and producing reports based on the results that you get. So yeah, there's a clear distinction there, especially these days. It used to be a bit different before, where there would be a bit more of a mix between the two roles, but now the distinction is quite a bit more clear. Is there someone we can watch the video again? Yes, it will be uploaded onto our website at the Northwest GLH under the education section. The link will be in your Eventbrite invitation as well. So please do visit it after this session. It should be uploaded from tomorrow, hopefully. Are jobs for genetic counselors hard to gain after qualifying? Have any of our STP trainees joined yet? I could take this question. Right, maybe not. Maybe they'll just be joining for the last session, so we can come back to that. But we do have well, not us, but the organisation called MAISE. I think it's the Manchester Academy for Healthcare Science. They've got an open day on Thursday morning at 9:30. We'll provide you the link at the end of this session as well. And one of the lead genetic counselors will be there as well. So it would be a good opportunity to ask this type of question with regards to the STP specifically. Can you please tell me where I can find a list of genetic tests, equipment, and the software used in the laboratory? Anyone want to answer that one? Where can I find a list of genetic test equipment and the software used in your laboratory? If I'm being honest, I don't think that would be publicly available of exactly what equipment we use or specifically what software we use. That would be more of a Google search, I'm afraid. I don't think there's a list like that, but for example, one of the most common pieces of software that we use for variant analysis is Alamut, which I think almost every genetics lab uses. And then with regards to sequencing, for example, we use equipment such as the MySeq or the HiSeq provided by Illumina. And those are sort of the main two pieces of equipment that we use for a lot of our tests. We'll take a couple more questions. Right, we've got another question about what advice would you give to applicants for this year when writing their answers for the application about scientific skills? Please, again, if you can ask that question, please, after the last session again, which will be STP specific. And it'll be much easier to answer it at that point with our current trainees. So that was by Kate, Ollie and Ali. Although I think I said that before, didn't I? So I'll read this out, and if anyone from the STP training program can answer it, whether you've got any advice with regards to writing the answers for the application about scientific skills. And again, it's because there hasn't been an opportunity really to get lab experience due to the pandemic.
I can help answer. I don't know if anybody else is around at the minute. So I'd just say, you know, the people who are reviewing the applications, they know that COVID has been around and that has stopped people from getting work experience. So please don't worry about that. They're not expecting people to have loads of experience this year because they understand what the circumstances have been. So please don't worry about that at all. And, you know, things like attending this open day, that's a really good way to show that you've gone out of your way to gain some more knowledge about the topic. So even if you haven't got the actual lab experience, think about other things that you have done, such as attending this open day. And even things like, you know, you could mention in your application that you maybe tried to get lab experience, but because of the pandemic, you weren't able to, because at least it shows that, you know, you've gone out of your way to try and learn more. And I can see that question actually, Nick, and she's also asked what band level do you start when you get on the STP if you haven't got a master's. So it doesn't matter if you've got a master's or not. Once you get on the STP, you're a band 6 regardless of previous qualifications. Everyone's at the same level, and then once you register, if you get a job as a clinical scientist, that would usually be a band 7.
Perfect, thank you, Holly. How do you spell the PhD after the STP program? That's called HSST. So Higher Specialist Scientist Training Program. And can I apply with a second-class lower degree? I think the requirement is a 2-1, if I'm not mistaken. I think this will be addressed again in the final session by the STPs, but I think there are circumstances where you can apply with a second-class degree as well. And again, this information is available on the National School for Healthcare Scientists website. And we'll take one more question by Katie. What additional responsibilities does a clinical scientist have compared to a genetic tech role? So I briefly touched on this before, where I said that the main role of the clinical scientist is data analysis, troubleshooting of assays, and also validating results and writing reports, which are then sent to our clinician colleagues. As a genetic technologist, that role is much more focused on actually doing the laboratory-based work and producing the data that a lot of the time does get, for example, genotyping does take place within the job role of the genetic technologist, but then when it comes to, let's say, validation of that data and the steps after that, which would be report writing, that's when the clinical scientist comes into play. Right, okay, so I think most of the questions do seem to relate to the STP, so we shall just move on to our last session now. And Sarah, are you going to start with this?
I think Becky's got the slides. Yeah, I can share my screen now.
Would you like to share? Yeah, thank you.
Just let me know when you can see them. Yeah, I can see them. Just need to put, yeah, perfect. Brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, hi everyone and welcome to the STP talk. A few of us are just going to talk to you about the STP, what to expect, the application process and hints and tips. So just to introduce ourselves, my name's Sarah and I'm a third-year genomics STP.
My name's Becky. I'm also a third-year genomics STP in Manchester.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm a second-year STP in the NWGLH in Manchester.
And hi, I'm Zoe and I'm a first-year genomics STP, also here at Manchester.
Okay, so next slide, please. So as I said, I'll talk to you about the genomics STP trainee, so I apologise if you are interested in another specialty. Overview of the application process and tips from current trainees. Next slide, please. So I'll just talk you through the genomics STP first. So for those who aren't aware, the STP is a 3-year course and the first year is made up of rotations, which for genomics usually means genomics, bioinformatics, reproductive science and genomic counselling. Genomic counsellors, STPs, do the same rotations in the first year, but cancer genomics do slightly different rotations. They do genomics, bioinformatics, and then histopathology and haematology. These rotations allow you to gain insight into complementary specialties and those that we often collaborate with and receive referrals from. And then the second and third years are split the core of the genomics curriculum, and these focus on different areas, so prenatal, pediatric, adult and cancer. The structure of training may vary depending on the location, but all genomics STPs will cover the same topics. Running alongside the training is the Masters in Genomics. So in all 3 years, you have university teaching, coursework and exams, and the research project runs from year 2. Next slide, please. On a typical day, you will receive in-house training from the team you're training within. So for example, I'm currently training in cardiac. Daily tasks include triaging samples for analysis, analysing data and writing reports. There are often opportunities to attend team meetings and MDTs and weekly educational sessions. Whilst training, you prepare a portfolio showcasing your work and how you are meeting the national schools requirements for that training. Then running alongside training, like I said, is the university portion of the STP. So following on from my previous example, I am training in cardiac genomics at the moment, but also have a university essay doing on adult genomics, and my research project is still ongoing. And I have just started university teaching for sporadic cancer. So sometimes it is about juggling different things. Next slide, please. So the application process involves an online application, a situational judgment test, an online interview. All the dates are listed here, but they can also be found on the National School website. You can only apply for one specialty, and all the applications and interviews, like invitation to interview, are done via a system called Oriel.
So the first stage of the application process is the long listing stage. So there's 2 components to this. There's the sort of generic application form in Oriel, and then there's an online psychometric test called the situational judgment test. So this assesses how well you'd respond in hypothetical clinical-based situations, and it maps closely to the person specification for STP trainees. So the values and behaviours outlined in that document you're going to want to be familiar with if you're sitting the test. The window for completion of the SJT this year is quite narrow. So it's between those times on the 8th to 11th of February. And I think that's actually after the application deadline closes. So what is the situational judgment test? Full disclosure, none of us have actually sat the SJT. It's a relatively new feature to the application process. But according to the school's website, it involves 25 hypothetical scenarios. And I've given an example of one of these scenarios on the screen. And each of these has multiple response options, and you have to grade each response on how appropriate you think it would be as a thing for a healthcare scientist to do. So there's 174 questions in total, and marks are given based on how close any applicants come to the correct answers. Overall, it takes about 50 minutes to complete, and once you start the test for real, only 1 attempt's allowed. And if it's similar to previous years, around the top 2/3 of applicants will progress to shortlisting after this. So advice for the SJT, like I've already mentioned, definitely read the person specification. The SJT maps really closely to the values and behaviours in this. So really, when you're going through the test in each scenario, you want to be asking yourself, what would the ideal healthcare scientist do according to those set of specifications. Definitely don't leave it too close to the deadline to sit the test, just in case there's any last minute technical difficulties, which means that you don't get it submitted on time. Go through the practice tests on the Pearson VUE website. These are up now, and you can look at them as many times as you want before you take the test. Sometimes there's extra practice tests available elsewhere online, but they're usually behind a paywall. They can be useful. I did use them when I was sitting the numerical and logical reasoning tests, but actually I think the resource that you've got available on the Pearson VUE website for the SJT is more than sufficient to get you through it. There's no negative marking in the SJT, so make sure that you attempt all of the questions, even if you're not quite sure of exactly what to put. Definitely take the test in a quiet place, free from any kind of distraction. And finally, make sure you have a stable internet connection before you start, because you definitely don't want to get booted out halfway through taking the test. And you can check the system requirements on the Pearson VUE website for what you'd need to sit the test.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the shortlisting process. As you're probably already aware, it's 200 to 500 word reflective statements, first relating to scientific skills, elements of the person specification, and the second relating to transferable skills and physical requirements. And these will be reviewed likely by clinical scientists working in one of the departments across the NHS. So for both of these statements, fairly obvious, but it's important to bear in mind that you don't have to cover every single element of the person's specification, because there will be quite a long list. You've only got a certain amount of words to cover it all. And these should be specific for your scientific specialty, so you should be aware of the specialty for which you're applying. Next slide, please. So in terms of general tips, I think it's very important to make sure that you have specific examples of how you meet the criteria, since you'll be scored directly against these. Again, the NHS Constitution and values are very important, since these lay out the commitments of the NHS, patients and staff, and the values by which NHS workers are expected to operate under. Also, to pick the criteria you cover carefully, again, in line with only having a very limited amount of words to get your point across. And really think about how you could differentiate yourself or stand out among other applicants, because there will be quite a number of applicants per position. Also, it's good to show evidence that you've done the research. Again, as alluded to earlier, you mentioned attending open days like this, or talking to past trainees and or clinical scientists who are already qualified, to get an insight into what the job involves too. You might get some bonus points for thinking about current issues facing specialism. For example, it's interesting to think about ethical considerations in genomic testing as it gets rolled out into more mainstream medicine disciplines. One thing that I sort of overlooked a little bit at the very beginning was to really make sure and bear the patient in mind. For example, if you're coming from a scientific background like I did, it's kind of easy to gravitate towards thinking about the assays and how they work and what the sensitivity and specificity is and things like that. But you also have to consider the holistic side of it. So why are you doing the test? And there's a patient behind every result. Also interesting to think about where the field's heading in terms of latest and future developments, since genomics is a very rapidly evolving field. And also by transferable skills, so not only the scientific, also the softer skills such as problem solving, communication, and things like that. So that's some of the things I would consider.
Yes, so for the actual interview, obviously it might change slightly this year. If you do get through to interview stage, obviously congratulations, it's very competitive. And if you do get through, you will receive guidance specific for how the interview is running specifically this year before. And don't worry, they give you plenty of time. It's not like they're going to give you the guidance just on the morning and then expect you to do it in the afternoon. You'll have time to prepare. So the general format is, for last year at least, we had 2 interviewers, one of which was from the department that you were interviewing for, at least, and you had 7 questions total. And the questions, you will have questions from different areas, obviously, because we want to check across not just your scientific knowledge, but also your personality-wise, whether it's a fit for the program. But generally, you'll have general science questions. So it could be something like, the classic, what sensitivity versus specificity. You'll have specialism-specific questions. So it could be on a technique that's used in genomics, or how troubleshooting happens. And then obviously you'll have NHS values questions. So it could be on diversity, or anything related to the NHS constitution, really. Also, you can get some situational judgment questions, which hopefully the SPIC may have helped you prepare for. So say if someone in your department was seen to be suffering from depression, what would you do? How would you go about that? Something like that. So to standardize the interview across the different institutes, the questions are taken from a pool of questions, obviously to make it all much fairer. And in the interview, you will likely be prompted for follow-up information after you've given your answer. So don't worry if this happens. So it doesn't mean that what you've said is wrong. It doesn't mean that it's not enough. They're just giving you a chance to, you know, expand on it and showcase your knowledge better, or just seeing if there's some more information. Obviously, they know you're nervous, you're going to forget things that you know. It's just really to help you. It's not to, you know, say that you've done it wrong. So if they ask you follow-up questions, don't worry about it. Next slide, please. So there's just some tips that we've thought about. So obviously the first one is to really reread the person's specification and job description, and also your application, because it can be quite a while between submitting the application and actually having your interview. So remember what you said, why it's the reason you got the interview in the first place. Remember how you sold yourself, but also you need to know, you know, what they're looking for. This is just for any job in general anyway. But yeah, so make sure that you know what they want you to demonstrate when you're going into that interview. Looking for recent news and your specialism, that obviously gives you great things to talk about in your interview. It'll make you more confident, and also it shows that, you know, you've got an interest in the field. If you know something that's happened like a week or two ago, they'll be like, oh, clearly you're on it. Obviously the key techniques is essential. One of you're bound to get a question on techniques or how they're used, how they're applied. And following on from that, if you can, try and figure out what the department you're applying to particularly focuses on. So for example, obviously we offer the same services across the country. However, certain places do have slightly different focuses. For example, the whole genome sequencing at the moment is mainly done in Birmingham and also London. So if you're applying somewhere else in the UK, this might not be particularly as relevant for you to spend as much time on, but obviously do be aware of it. Something I thought was really useful was actually having practice questions and practice interviews with other applicants. So got in touch with other applicants through Student Room. If you don't know, it's really useful. It can also be a bit stressful, but it is really useful. Obviously, everyone's got different backgrounds, so hearing the things that other people think of and questions that they've thought of, or even how they answer them, can really help you reflect on your own answers and make them all much better. We've put also, do not worry about if something goes wrong. Obviously, we've been having COVID online meetings for nearly 2 years now. Everyone knows that stuff's going to go wrong, that Zoom doesn't work and all these things. They're really nice, the interviews, they'll know that this can happen. I personally, my internet didn't work on the morning of my interview and it was fine. It was stressful for me, but they were completely understanding about it and put me at ease. So don't worry if that happens to you. Obviously the core values, have specific examples of how you meet them. Don't just say, I'm compassionate. Great, tell us how. Or which obviously you probably would have done already on your application, but just have one for all of them because you never know what they're going to ask you about. And lastly, university careers, if that is available to you, if you're still at university, is a great thing. Obviously, they do interviews for all these things. Some of them will have experience specifically with the STP, but you can ask them to give you mock interviews. And it's not just good to prepare you, but also to boost your confidence. If you've had a mock interview, even if it's gone badly, at least you'll have a bit of practice and be ready for that situation. Next slide, please. So we've just included where you can find some more information, some resources, and you'll have access to these slides after, so you can access all these websites. Obviously, we've taken a lot of it, the information from the NHS website, but yeah, there's other things like the STP perspectives are particularly useful, where people write obviously their perspective on applying to the STP. And then another thing to note, like Nick's already mentioned, is that there'll be the school open day on Thursday morning, and they'll have a lot more information about the actual application process and any specific questions. So for example, that one about the equivalence of foreign qualifications, they'll have a lot more information about that as well. So thank you for listening.
Great, thank you very much, everyone. So we have several questions, but before we go to the questions, we'll just have our last 5-minute video that's been produced by Jess, and I'll just share my screen for that one. And after that, we'll have an extended Q&A session to address questions that have been asked.
Hi everyone, I'm Jess Crook. I'm a pre-registration clinical scientist at the Northwest Genomic Laboratory Hub based at the Liverpool Women's site. And today I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about my journey to becoming a pre-registration clinical scientist, as this is a role that is equivalent to that of the STP. I'm also training to become a clinical scientist in genetics. It's just a different pathway. And it's an in-house training programme that gives you the opportunity to train on the job, so you're working amongst the scientists, learning all about the different services and the day-to-day work of a scientist, as well as building a portfolio of your work to give us evidence after your training or at your training interview to show that you are competent to become a clinical scientist. This route also takes a minimum of 3 years and is a great way to expose yourself to the world of work of a clinical scientist. So a little bit about how I got here. I initially did an undergraduate degree at Liverpool, and this was in biological sciences, and then did a master's degree also at the University of Liverpool in advanced biological sciences, specialising in oncology. I was then sure that I wanted to go in genetics, so, and being lucky enough to have the Liverpool Women's Hospital on my doorstep, I inquired about volunteering here. I was lucky enough to be accepted to be a volunteer here, so in March 2019 I became a volunteer in the laboratory here, and it was great as it exposed me to all the different aspects of the lab, including the cyto side, the molecular side and the oncology teams, and it was great because it was just a way in for me to experience real day-to-day work in an NHS genomics laboratory. I then was lucky enough to interview and then be successful for a Band 3 post in July of 2019, and I did this Band 3 post as a cytogenetics Band 3. I worked in the blood culture room, culturing blood samples for karyotyping and fish analysis. And then in November of 2019 I interviewed for a Band 5 post, and again I was lucky enough to be successful, and I was a Band 5 on the molecular team. So that again, this exposed me to a great variety of different molecular techniques, and then as a Band 5 the analysis of different molecular assays for different disorders. After this I thought, right, it's time. After about a year's experience I thought I'm going to now go for a pre-registration clinical scientist post, as this is the pathway that I knew I always wanted to follow. So in December 2020 I interviewed for a pre-registration clinical scientist, and again I was successful in this, and now have the opportunity to embark on this role, on this journey to becoming a clinical scientist in genetics. I started my training in April 2021, so I've been on it for about 9 months now. And so far I have ran the HIV service in the laboratory, which has been a great way to expose me into a really fast moving, dynamic service, which has lots of samples coming in every single day, and it's really made me, it's made me want to do the job even more. And also I have now started to help out with the running of the CF service, which again, a much more complex disorder, and has been a really great way for me to learn so much more about the ins and outs, and even just the fundamentals of genetics to help me to in my everyday work. And soon I will be going on to the FH team to help run that service. So I just wanted to say really that this is another option for those people who are thinking about becoming clinical scientists in genetics. It's a great way to really expose yourself to all the different assays that we do, all the different techniques we do, all the different types of people you meet who are in different jobs, and it's just a really nice environment to learn and to feel like you've been challenged and you have done something for society. It's a really great role. So if any of you have any questions, I would be really happy to ask them about pre-registration clinical scientist, but also about the tech roles that I've done that have led me to this, as it's all a massive learning journey that I've been on, and it's just shown me that it's just a great pathway, a great, you know, stepping stone to the career that I would like to follow. So yeah, any questions, please do not be afraid to ask. Thanks.